They say that memory is a ghost, but for me it is a physical weight. It is a pressure that has lived on my left shoulder for 15 years, a cold, heavy grip that never quite lets go. To understand why I can't sleep in the dark, and why I wake up drenched in sweat even in the dead of winter, you have to understand the night I was left behind in the shmashana, the place where the living surrender, the dead to the fire. I was 10 years old when my grandfather died. In our culture, the family is a fortress, and he was its foundation. He was the patriarch, the silent absolute authority, whose word was law. I wasn't close to him. He was a monument to be respected, not a man to be hugged. But my parents told me I used to chatter to him endlessly when I was a toddler. By the time I was 10, our relationship had settled into a ritual of char and sparsh, touching his feet in silence, an acknowledgement of the hierarchy that defines our lives. When he passed, the fortress didn't just crumble, it transformed. The house filled with the smell of incense, sandalwood paste, and the low rhythmic humming of mourning. They prepared him for his Antyesti, the last sacrifice. They washed his body, applied turmeric, and dressed him in the simple white shroud of the departed. I was supposed to stay at my aunt's house. Children are kept away from the cremation grounds. We are told they are places of heavy energy, filled with bacteria and spirits that the young mind isn't ready to process. But I was 10, and I was curious. I managed to slip out and follow my mother as she left for my grandfather's house, trailing a few steps behind her. See unnoticed in the chaos of the funeral procession. I watched as my father and uncles lifted the arthi, the bed of bamboo sticks, and began the long walk to the outskirts of town. As they walked, they chanted, Ram Nam Satya Hai, the name of God is the truth. It is a chant intended to remind us that the physical body is an illusion, but it is also a shield meant to drive away the restless souls, the Bhoots and Pishachas that haunt the transitions between worlds. The shmashana is always located far from the living, usually near a river or a pond, marking the boundary between the town and the wild. As we reached the gates, the sun was beginning to dip. The cemetery was vast, a landscape of rows upon rows of samadhis, stone memorial platforms built over the remains of the deceased. I stood at a distance, say watching the smoke rise as the lead mourner performed the Kapala Kriya, breaking the skull to release the spirit into the sky. The heat, the chanting, and the emotional weight of the day began to blur. I found a stone platform near the edge of the grounds, and exhausted, I fell asleep. When I woke up, the world had changed. The sun was gone. The chanting had stopped. The only light came from the last orange embers of the pyre, glowing like dying eyes in the blue-black dusk. Panic is a cold thing. It starts in the stomach and moves to the throat. I looked around, but the hundreds of relatives who had been there were gone. In our culture, everyone must leave together and immediately bathe, a ritual called snana, to wash away the spiritual pollution of the dead. They must have thought I was safe at my aunt's. I was alone in the abode of ghosts. As I stood up, the silence was broken by the sound of animals. Jackals began to howl in the distance, a high-pitched, yelping scream that sounded like a person in pain. I started to run toward the fire, hoping someone lingered, but there was no one. The shmashana at night is not the same place it is during the day. It is the territory of the Pishacha, dark-complexioned entities with bulging veins that feed on human energy. I felt a sudden, nauseating sense of impending doom, a visceral weight in the air that made it hard to breathe. Then came the feeling of being watched. Scientists call it the sensed presence effect, a psychological phenomenon where the brain, deprived of sensory data in the dark, begins to project its own internal body map onto the environment. Your brain's hyperactive agency detection device goes into overdrive, assuming every shadow is a predator because, evolutionarily, it's safer to be wrong and scared than to be right and dead. But to a 10-year-old in a cemetery, it wasn't a mechanism, it was a presence. I started running deeper into the cemetery, the rows of samadhis looking like teeth in the moonlight, and that's when I heard the footsteps. Thump, 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 thump. Every time my feet hit the earth, I heard a second set of steps right behind me, like a Bhoot. Bhoot, a restless spirit that mimics the movements of the living. In folklore, these spirits often have backward-facing feet, their tracks leading away even as they move closer. I reached the tree line, my breath coming in ragged sobs. My brain was in a state of hypervigilance, my amygdala scanning for threats, making every rustle of a leaf sound like a lunging creature. I could feel the presence at arm's length. I could feel the coldness of it. I thought of the Pichal Peri, the woman with the backward feet who haunts the forests, born of trauma and betrayal. I took a leap of faith and ran toward the silhouette of the trees, toward the faint voices I could hear in the distance. I reached a clearing where there was a community pond, the place for the ritual purification bath. I saw the familiar faces of my family, their white clothes glowing in the dark. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, a common symptom of extreme terror where the body shuts down entirely. I ran toward my aunt, and just as she turned to see me, I felt it. A hand, a heavy cold palm landed directly on my left shoulder. It wasn't a brush or a tap, it was a grip. The fingers felt long and icy, pressing into the muscle. My body froze. I didn't turn around. I didn't see if it was my aunt reaching out or something that had followed me from the pyre. Everything went white, and I fainted on the spot. I was sick for a week with a fever the doctors couldn't explain. For years, I had nightmares of the shmashana. Even now, 15 years later, I suffer from what neurologists call phantom sensations. Just as an amputee feels pain in a limb that is no longer there, my brain has permanently encoded that traumatic touch into its sensory cortex. When I am stressed or when the room goes dark, the neurons in my brain's body map fire as if that hand is still there. I never went back to that town or that house. My parents say I was just a sneaky child who got scared, but I know what I felt. I know that the shmashana is a place where the barrier between what we know and what we fear is paper thin, and sometimes when the light fails and the silence grows too deep, I can still feel those cold fingers tightening their grip, reminding me that some things never truly stay buried in the ash.